or from the left. Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host. Welcome to Sekulow. Executive producer Will Haynes sitting in the host chair today. Jordan will be joining us momentarily. He's in Milwaukee attending events at the RNC and just got done with an event with our colleague here at the ACLJ, Rick Grinnell, and with our attorney, Ben Cisney. It was a panel on lawfare. You can see on the screen there. And lawfare being the chosen form of attacks on the conservative movement for some time now. I know that they started with the Tea Party, a case that we were heavily involved in defending the Tea Party as they were scrutinized unconstitutionally. They were gone after for their views. It was viewpoint discrimination by the IRS, trying to shut that down at a pivotal moment in the Obama administration. That was around 2010 when they really wanted to stop the shellacking that President Obama called the midterm election that year. But he will be joining us in the next segment of the broadcast, but we've got a lot to cover today on Sekulow. And we're going to start with the nomination of J.D. Vance, sitting senator from Ohio, as vice presidential running mate of President Trump. It was a spectacular showmanship that the president put forward as he waited until literally the last moment. We didn't find out who the VP pick would be until probably 30 minutes before they started the nomination process at the convention for the vice presidential role on the ticket. We found out it was J.D. Vance. There had been a lot of speculation. I know some of our callers yesterday all thought it was going to be Vance. There were some head fakes there at the end. We heard Glenn Youngkin may be the dark horse candidate, the governor of Virginia. But what had been reported for a long time, that the front runner, J.D. Vance, was indeed the pick of President Trump to be his running mate in this election. So we will get into that. We'll talk with Jordan about what he thinks it means for the campaign, and we will talk about the left's reaction to it. In all of this talk of the left of toning down the rhetoric after the failed assassination attempt, the tragedy in Pennsylvania just over the weekend, we saw President Biden give 3 different addresses to the nation, 2 very quick ones. One was a readout in the Roosevelt Room of a briefing he'd received. And then we saw that Oval Office address. And the entire theme of the left has been tone down the rhetoric, tone down the rhetoric. But what you're hearing from elected officials that are Democrats, colleagues of J.D. Vance in the Senate, we'll play these in the next segment, is not toning down the rhetoric at all. You're seeing them doubling down on calling this administration, if they were to be elected, the most extreme in our history. That's from a DNC fundraising email they sent out yesterday. That if this ticket is elected, it will be the most extreme presidency in our history. Now, what does that tell you about what the left is saying when they say tone down the rhetoric? They don't mean their rhetoric. They mean conservative rhetoric. They want the conservatives to not talk about the important issues. They don't want you to incite things. But that's not the problem here. The problem here isn't that conservatives have been inciting violence against political candidates. It has been the Biden administration and the Biden campaign for so long, and all the elected officials down the ballot that have been saying that Donald Trump and Republicans are a threat to our democracy, a threat. And that's what leads us here. So we're going to get into this in the next segment with Jordan. We have Harry Hutchison on the show today, CeCe Heil later in the show. We've got a lot to cover. But I want to know what your thoughts are on this pick as President Trump's running mate. J.D. Vance, give us a call at 1-800-684-3110. Were you surprised by it? Are you happy with it? You wish it had been a different direction? What are your thoughts now as we head towards November? Once again, give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. Jordan will be joining me from Milwaukee to talk about this as well, so you can get your questions into him. But I want to remind you, it's our Life and Liberty Drive. We never stop our efforts to defend life and liberty here, ACLJ.org.
We now have the former president's pick, and it is J.D. Vance, the 39-year-old freshman senator from the state of Ohio.
Madam Chair, it is a great honor to move that J.D. Vance be nominated by acclamation by this Republican National Convention as its candidate for the office of Vice President of the United States of America.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion that Senator J.D. Vance be nominated by acclamation. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye!
All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Senator Vance is one of the most thoughtful, innovative leaders we have seen in the Senate in recent years, and I expect he's going to bring that to the ticket and would bring that to the White House as well.
And he's great on these mainstream media shows. He's just very moderate and then hits you in the face eloquently. But his biography is stunning. His biography, he's a poor kid from a steel town in Ohio. His dad wasn't there. His mom was an addict, raised by his grandmother in one of these towns that was hollowed out by these dumb trade deals. He's kind of has the biography of populism.
I think it's a good pick. I mean, if you look at JD's upbringing, he wasn't given anything. Low economics, I mean, goes into Marines, writes a bestseller book, understands what has happened inside America.
This is a new generation. This is a new generation of leaders in this country, and J.D. Vance is going to be the next Vice President of the United States.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Executive producer Will Haynes in this chair today. But I have Jordan connected from Milwaukee on right now. And Jordan, you just got done with a panel that ACLJ Action was leading on Lawfare. And it had Rick Grinnell, our colleague, and you talked about all things Lawfare. Give us a sense of what you guys discussed and how it was received in that room in Milwaukee.
Sure, and that was the Kansas GOP that sponsored that event, and they've been our client before, Will, and for our audience to know, of course, in that 14th Amendment case, they were critical in putting together that multi-state challenge to the attempt to remove President Trump from the ballot, from the primary ballot. I think there's been so many issues, of course, what happened over the weekend. We can almost forget where the issue of lawfare has taken us, but the reality, and again, we're fighters here at the ACLJ, so it's not to just be negative, but we saw that the final, what is the final outcome of full-on lawfare and demonization of your political opponent when you criminalize someone for being, supporting a Make America Great Again agenda, and you want to put them in jail, or you want to bankrupt them, or you want to seize their buildings. Well, you encourage crazy people to take potentially violent action against them, thinking that they're doing something like preventing the next Hitler. I mean, we've heard that kind of rhetoric used about President Trump. And so, again, when you sent me that DNC email, again, the fact that they're going right back to extremist, that's just one step away from saying, white supremacist or evil or wrong. I don't think the left is going to be able to hold their tongue on J.D. Vance or Donald Trump for very long. I think there is the news story about, again, the law enforcement failures, the Secret Service failures, that's a real story in Washington, D.C. I thought Rick Grinnell said something very interesting, though, today in our panel. Will, he said we don't need a 6-month-long congressional investigation to ask why there was no Secret Service on the top of a building 100 yards away from where the former president of the United States was speaking. That should not take members of Congress having to subpoena people. That should be one question to the head of the Secret Service. And now it looks like they're trying to put blame on local law enforcement, whereas we've seen in these other shooting attacks inside the United States that oftentimes they are not equipped or ready to deal with active shooter situations. And so in this matter, though, you had Secret Service with time to prepare, time to advance. There's a lot of talk still about that. Of course, people saw the bandage last night. I think just seeing President Trump and that bandage on his ear is a reminder to the entire country of what he went through 48 hours ago. And I think, again, talking about Senator Vance, his background. I think we'll have time. He'll address the whole convention in a couple days, and that'll be when we hear a little bit more about his story. But right now, Will, what is dominating this convention is obviously one, not being afraid to get out there, get our message out, and to take a stand against this demonization for our politics.
Well, Jordan, I want to play this clip for you because we're going to talk a little bit about the congressional investigation in the next segment. We'll bring Harry Hutchison on to talk about the letters that have gone out from Congressman Comer, Chairman Comer, to the Secret Service. But I wanted to play this because you said, I don't think the left can hold back too long on their demonization. And this happened this morning while you were preparing and delivering a panel on Lawfare and brought up the demonization issue. But this is from Senator Chris Murphy, a colleague of J.D. Vance in the United States Senate. And this is how he characterized, it's a little bit long, but I think it's important to play the whole thing, the pick of J.D. Vance and what a Trump-Vance campaign and an administration would look like. Let's go ahead and play bite 8.
There is a very mainstream element of the Republican Party and Trump's infrastructure that is very thoughtful about how they are going to end democratic norms. J.D. Vance is part of that infrastructure, right? He has been fairly public in his antipathy for democracy. There is just a dominant strain in the Republican Party and some of the sort of thin intellectual veneer that covers Trumpism that J.D. Vance is a big part of, that simply believes that democracy is antiquated, that it doesn't work any longer, that we would be better off if we just had one person in charge and the rest of us were stripped of our rights, and that we put men back in charge, that we created this nation in a new cloak of Christian nationalism. That's where J.D. Vance comes from, and he talks a good game, but if you really listen to him, he is being picked in part because he is going to help shape this transition away from democratic norms, this transition to a white patriarchal Christian-dominated nation, something that's very different, right, than the nation that many of us have thought we have been a part of this many years.
Jordan, Senator Murphy is using a little bit bigger terms than the left is used to using, but it's all the same red meat to the left that got us to where we're at.
Yeah, the idea that they want to get rid of our democratic norms in our country. This is someone who was an Iraq war veteran, served his country, is the first millennial to be nominated to serve in an executive branch at this level. Served his country, then attended Yale Law School, wrote a book that was loved by people on both sides of the aisle. I don't think it was political at the time at all. Has been outspoken early on about his views about President Trump. Early on, he's someone who switched, that was concerned about some of the rhetoric himself, in the early days of President Trump. Then got to know him, and he got to see the work that was done and the issues. But you see what Senator Murphy said. If you happen to be someone, even if you went to Yale Law School, even if you're someone who should be on their side of the aisle, and you happen to realize, hey, you know what, this Make America Great Again message resonates with people because it works and because it's the right way to fight in Washington, you are an enemy of democracy. What is worse? That's dictators. Dictators, I guess, are worse. But most dictators around the world are enemies of the United States. Certainly, when we start calling people enemies of democracy, that's the kind of language you would reserve for the Ayatollah or for Vladimir Putin, maybe. Not for a Republican-nominated vice presidential candidate and U.S. Senator from Ohio.
Jordan, the moment that the Truth Social announcement of J.D. Vance went out, I got a push notification from Vox, which, the storied conservative publication that Vox is. I'm kidding. But its headline was that Trump's VP pick is a naked authoritarian. They had it ready to go to call him an authoritarian. In the climate we're in, they went there immediately. And I also want to hear from callers on this, what you think about this pick. And you can do that at 1-800-684-3110. But Jordan, go ahead. Yeah,
this authoritarian line, what are they talking about? I mean, you realize they're just throwing this stuff out because he's now associated with President Trump? This was someone who wasn't afraid to go on mainstream networks and defend conservatism or defend the Republican Party, fight back against the weaponization of our legal system, like we talked about today with the Kansas GOP, which people are really concerned about because of where those outcomes go when you criminalize your political beliefs in America, and the idea that everyone now is thinking. I mean, the amount of security changes you could imagine that have gone on just in the last every day here has changed because of what happened on Saturday. But you know what's amazing about our country is that happened on Saturday and that we're all here, and we nominated, chosen by President Trump, nominated a vice president at this convention. And again, people are going to learn more and more about, J.D. Vance. He was a name known because of the book. He is a name known because of course, his time in the U.S. Senate, and because I think he kind of scares the left because one, this is likely especially if they are to win, is someone who is set up to run for potentially president in 4 years. I mean, think about that. To have a president who is a millennial and is someone who is able to reach across, winning in Ohio, winning in the states that matter, and is able to take the same message that isn't afraid to, and went to the same schools they did. And they that always, just upsets them the most. How can this Yale law graduate really take these views unless he's some kind of evil dictator? That must be the only way. He's an authoritarian. Like you said, you use these words, and crazy people do what they did on Saturday. If you use these words to describe mainstream political actors in our country, and I don't think you can get any more mainstream than being a nominee on the Republican Party or a nominee on the Democrat Party, one of the two political biggest parties in our country in our lifetimes.
Folks, we are at a pivotal moment in the history of this country, and the ACLJ is redoubling our efforts to defend your life and liberty. And that's why we launched our Life and Liberty Drive, where your gifts to the ACLJ are doubled. Go to aclj.org. This morning, as we said, Jordan was giving a panel with Rick Rennell and Ben Cisney on Lawfare, educating the conservative movement on the dangers of Lawfare and how we at the ACLJ push back. And that's what when you give to the ACLJ, are supporting our efforts in pushing back against the Lawfare of the left, as well as educating the conservative movement about how they can get involved. Go to aclj.org and have your gift doubled today.
Has your speech changed, Rick? I mean, has it changed kind of your thoughts on how you'll be making remarks throughout the week?
If everybody is just focused on the assassination attempt, then I think it would be too much. But there's no question that I think we have to adjust our thinking. Everything has changed. I think President Trump now views the race differently. And certainly I see it from my phone just lighting up from friends who are not that political saying, wow, I have to vote for Donald Trump now. So I think everything has changed.
Yeah. And I felt that right when I got here. I mean, I think that the whole substance, I know we're doing a panel tomorrow, and this is the fear of the panel long term, was that when you go banana republic style, this is the kind of outcome that you get towards is political assassinations. But I do want to talk to you about the way the media kind of reacted initially. I mean, we had shows canceled this morning, Rick, on MSNBC because they were too worried about what their guests may say.
Comcast owns MSNBC and NBC. The Comcast executives need to do more to tone down all of this incredible hate. And they've had people calling Donald Trump Hitler. And the natural extension of calling someone Hitler is that Hitler should be removed. And so they have a responsibility. Comcast has a responsibility. And I know a lot of people listening to us, a lot of people in our ACLJ family purchased Comcast as their provider. And they need to understand that Comcast owns what happens on Morning Joe. Comcast owns what happens on Joy Reid show. Comcast owns what happens on Rachel Maddow's show. And unless we're going to have a better debate where there's dissenting views, calm views, and not just one-sided radical views, I think Comcast has got a problem.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Will Haynes, executive producer, in the studio here, and I have Jordan live from Milwaukee, attending the RNC, and hosted a panel this morning on Lawfare with Rick Grinnell and attorney Ben Cisney from the ACLJ. And Jordan, one thing I did want to bring up, and we also have Harry Hutchison joining us for this segment as well, but that Congressman Comer, chairman of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, has announced that Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, there will be a hearing with the U.S. Secret Service director on the security failures surrounding the failed assassination attempt of President Trump on Saturday. Now, they also sent a letter requesting documents, and 3 of the requests are required by this Thursday, and that's a complete list of all law enforcement personnel with roles protecting the president at the campaign rally, all audio and video recordings in the Secret Service's possession, and any memorandum or notice issued by the director to security service personnel regarding it. And then they have about 6 more items that they gave until July 29th, things that will be a little bit more tedious to get all of in a complete package to give over to Congress. But, Jordan, what are your thoughts right now on the stage of this investigation and the role of Congress in oversight of the failures of security in Pennsylvania?
I think the first thing should happen is that head of Secret Service should offer their resignation to the president. And the president should accept it. They should still have to come testify. And there should be some other firings. But do we ever see that in the bureaucracy? Do we ever see that in these situations? And listen, we support law enforcement. They're in tough situations. Every situation is not perfect, but we're talking, again, 100 yards from the former president of the United States. People saw, local law enforcement saw, and yet the advance team from the Secret Service, who knew that this event was going on probably for weeks, just totally overlooked these places that people could, if they wanted to, go up and try to carry out one of these assassinations, and they weren't even focused on those. But local law enforcement had to hear from local citizens that there was someone climbing up there before they got 8 shots off. People should be willing to resign, and probably a decent amount of people, including on that advance team from the Secret Service, need to be fired. It's not necessarily the Secret Service that's traveling with President Trump on a daily basis that they're just showing up. They're showing up at the event to do their job, relying on the advance work of other Secret Service officers. I would usually never beat up on law enforcement, but in this case, it is law enforcement that needs to accept the blame for what happened and accept responsibility and explain to the American people, or else the American people are going to start thinking of theories that we don't want to go down in our country. So is the left going to finally accept this was a failure by law enforcement, and they need to accept the responsibility? You can do that and still be pro-law enforcement. It's okay to say these individuals may not be the right people in charge at the Secret Service, and they may not be focused on the right thing, like making sure the leading presidential candidates in our country are safe. I mean, if you're JD Vance, you accepted this now. You've got 3 kids. Now you're the VP nominee. I guarantee it's a different decision-making process. Being here was a different decision-making process. Walking down the street at the Republican National Convention is a different decision-making process. And you can tell because the security rules keep changing day by day. And that's okay because we're trying, one thing, it's an incredible country that can occur, and we can still assemble this way at a large-scale way with a lot of very high-profile people who, people have strong opinions about, with all of the security apparatus that is in place, and that President Trump is here with that bandage on his ear. Again, I think walking in like he did to the convention last night, as most nominees would, just to view the convention, was a very strong statement. And I think, the American people on both sides of the aisle can't wait to hear from him. And I don't think it's up to him, by the way, to litigate this issue with law enforcement. I think he can point to the rhetoric, the demonization, the trying to destroy his business and his family and put him behind bars. And that's what Joe Biden's Department of Justice is trying to do. And the George Soros DAs are trying to do. And they have hit walls. But as we've talked about a number of times, only someone like President Trump could even afford the amount of legal work that's gone into this, being president and being in a post-presidency, and then willing to put himself back out there again for the country. What I can tell this that is different this time around, Will, is that Republicans, certainly the ones here at the convention, are way more united around President Trump. And I think that's because they saw what he did as president, and of course they've seen what he has been willing to go through to stand up for Republican principles that many candidates have talked about, and elected officials have talked about for years, but have never really carried out. Oh, it got too hard or too controversial, or we made a deal. And he actually does it, pays the price for doing it, both personally, economically, and now physically, with being shot. And he is still here fighting for the American people. It's bigger than the Republican Party, but I also think it says a lot about the Republican Party.
That's right, Jordan. And something you mentioned also was that you believe that the Secret Service director should step down. And Harry, we heard from the Secret Service director put out a statement that she will not be stepping down, and that the buck does stop with her. My concern, and hopefully something will change and she will end up resigning from that position. But my concern is that this is more of the same from the Biden administration, where there is an administration, a branch of the executive branch that cannot do their job, and yet they remain in their post.
Precisely. And so this intelligence failure in Pennsylvania last weekend follows the intelligence failures that the Biden administration has undergone with respect to the Afghanistan withdrawal. So I think what we have seen is gross negligence on the part of the Secret Service. We've also seen published reports indicating that Secret Service personnel indicated that they were under-resourced. In other words, there was insufficient manpower in Pennsylvania. This led up to the assassination attempt. Keep in mind that the shooter was spotted at least 90 to 120 seconds before any shots rang out. Keep in mind that the building from which the shooter shot was basically unattended by the Secret Service or the local police. That is a gross intelligence failure, and now even MSNBC and Morning Joe are criticizing the Secret Service. She should resign immediately.
Folks, we are in the middle of our Life and Liberty drive here at the ACLJ for this month, and this is the work we do, whether it be education and analysis on this broadcast, or whether it be educating the public through panels, as Jordan did this morning with his panel with Rick Grinnell and Ben Cisney on Lawfare, or whether it be the FOIA requests that we have going out currently. We have one that is being drafted right now to go to the Secret Service, as well as one that we'll talk about in a little bit about at that military base, Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, where they were training people on base, soldiers on base, that pro-life groups were terrorists. You want to talk about rhetoric being heightened when you're having training sessions at our military installations that pro-life supporters are potentially terrorists. That is something we are not going to sit down and just take. Give today at aclj.org. Your gifts will be doubled during this Life and Liberty drive.
Last summer, we launched our first ever ACLJ Life and Liberty drive. We never could have imagined how much you, our ACLJ members and ACLJ champions, would exceed our expectations, and we can't thank you enough. We'd love to tell you that 1 year later, threats to life and liberty are no more. Sadly, the radical left is relentlessly doing everything it can to destroy the very foundations of this great nation: life, religious liberty, and the Constitution. The good news is your ACLJ team has not slowed down. We continue to fight in courtrooms across the country, including the Supreme Court, to defend your freedoms and to save innocent babies. And we're proud to announce the return of the ACLJ Life and Liberty Drive. Right now, your tax-deductible gift will be doubled, dollar for dollar, doubling your impact to defend your freedoms and help save innocent lives. Go to aclj.org right now and join us in this fight.
Keeping you informed and engaged.
now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Sekulow. I'm going to be jumping off the show in about 5 minutes. Will Haynes, our senior executive producer, is going to be with you too, taking your phone calls at 1-800-684-3110. If you notice my background, hotel in Milwaukee. We just finished an event here with me, Ben Cisney, ACLJ senior counsel, and Rick Ernell, who you know from our broadcast from the Trump administration, you know as part of our team. It was on Lawfare, and you see the photo. That's from the Kansas GOP, which had a great event and they asked us to kind of staff the event and to put on the event for them. And the level of questions, and I think that we all understand, Lawfare took a next step this past weekend, and these are activists that are, of course, not afraid to be here, not afraid to speak out. And, Will, I will say a big change also that you'll see and since we didn't have a convention at the last election cycle because of COVID, and so the activists weren't able to come together this way, is that these party members, for the most part, this is the party of President Trump right now, and he is the leader. They're going to stand with him. There's a little bit of shock, obviously, with what happened, but they're also trying to plan to win an election. And so they're excited about, JD Vance, that pick as well. Would it usually get a little bit more attention? Are we all kind of catching our breath in some ways as a nation? Absolutely. But I think over the week, too, you're going to see JD Vance address the convention on Wednesday. And then, of course, what the whole country and maybe the world is waiting to see is President Trump make his first major address since the incident on Saturday.
That's right. And I actually want to take a call while I have you on, Jordan. Let's go to Renee in Colorado calling on line 1. Renee, you're on Sekulow.
Thanks for taking my call. I think J.D. Vance is a fantastic pick. He speaks to the lower middle class people, and I think he gives them hope because they've seen what he has come up from. He is a great debater, and he is going to tear Kamala Harris apart on that debate stage. He's from the great state of Ohio, and as goes Ohio, so goes the nation. Thank you.
Actually have that debate. There is one, I think, on the books, but one of those that was on the books was actually, I think, canceled before. It'll be interesting, Will, to see if that ever happens, because J.D. Vance versus Harris, if you think Trump versus Joe Biden at 50% or wherever he is with his ability right now to even get the words out or understand the questions, like President Trump said, not even in a mean way, but that I can't respond to that because I can't even make out what he was saying there, that, we're going to see a president who just got shot and yet can be clear to the country and, got up the next day, played golf, flew to Milwaukee and was, here with the people all within 24 hours. I mean, that's pretty it's honestly, I think it just shows, again, the strength of his willpower to stand up for the American people. I think Renee is right. J.D. Vance speaks to young people. He, again, the first millennial, I'll keep saying that, to get nominated to this level of post. He comes from a tough background, but also went to Yale Law School. He's a person of faith. He's got 3 kids. I mean, so we can a lot of us relate to him about where he is. And I think that, like Renee said, he's going to be able to talk to people. He has a very similar politics of President Trump, which is that, this is not the country club Republican Party of business owners necessarily, of corporate titans, but of small business owners and people who are trying to get by in a country where inflation has gotten so high and these wars continue.
That's right, and we will continue to take your calls in this half hour, so go ahead and give us a call. What are your thoughts on President Trump's pick of J.D. Vance? Call 1-800-684-3110 to be on the air. And also remember, we are in the middle of this Life and Liberty drive as we fight for your life and liberty, both here and abroad, with our international work as we fight for the liberty of those in need. Go ahead and go to aclj.org to have your donation doubled while we're in this drive, and we'll be back with more in just a moment.
We now have the former president's pick, and it is JD Vance, the 39-year-old freshman senator from the state of Ohio.
Madam Chair, it is a great honor to move that JD Vance be nominated by acclamation by this Republican National Convention as its candidate for the office of Vice President of the United States of America.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion that Senator J.D. Vance be nominated by acclamation. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye!
All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Senator Vance is one of the most thoughtful, innovative leaders we have seen in the Senate in recent years, and I expect he's going to bring that to the ticket and would bring that to the White House as well.
And he's great on these mainstream media shows. He's just very moderate and then hits you in the face eloquently. But his biography's stunning. His biography, he's a poor kid from a steel town in Ohio. His dad wasn't there. His mom was an addict, raised by his grandmother in one of these towns that was hollowed out by these dumb trade deals. He's kind of has the biography of populism.
I think it's a good pick. I mean, if you look at JD's upbringing, he wasn't given anything. Low economics, I mean, goes into Marines, writes a bestseller book, understands what has happened inside America.
This is a new generation. This is a new generation of leaders in this country, and JD Vance is going to be the next Vice President of the United States.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Executive producer Will Haynes, joined by Cece Heil here in the studio, senior counsel at the ACLJ. And this is a story that we talked a little bit about last week, where there was a training slide at Fort Liberty in North Carolina, formerly Fort Bragg, that was put out on Twitter. An independent journalist was able to get this from someone at the base, and it was a training slide that labeled pro-life groups as terrorist groups. They had the logo of Operation Rescue, a group that ACLJ has throughout our career stood with and fought for in many ways. And then obviously National Right to Life, and even with the image of the New York Choose Life vanity license plate you can get to show your support for life. Right. Imagine that. But at first we talked about it with you, Cece, and we were very cautious because while it had official emblems on it, it had the shoulder of someone in fatigues. It looked as though it could be real. It wouldn't be shocking if it was real. We also wanted to be cautious that we would get to the bottom of it, find out if it's real, and then take appropriate action going from there.
Right. And when we first talked about it, it had not been verified, or the Fort Liberty had not said, yes, that was actually a training slide. So that's why we said, yes, we're going to wait for that confirmation. But the sad thing was it didn't shock us if it were truly a true slide. And now we know, in fact, that it was a true slide used at Fort Liberty for training. That's right.
Fort Liberty put out a statement. They blamed local garrison employees, which is the equivalent of blaming the low-level agents in Cincinnati when it came to the Tea Party. They said it didn't go through appropriate channels of review. It shouldn't have been done, and they're going to correct it. Great. Nothing to see here. That's typical of bureaucracy when they get caught with something as egregious as this. But we are sending out potentially as early as today. There are also some other legal developments that could impact the way that we take this on, because it is disgusting to see, especially with the temperature in the political climate as it is, that the U.S. military, our soldiers, are being trained, whether it be by a local garrison employee or not, that if you support Operation Rescue, or even when you look at what they say the activities of pro-life advocates are, it's things like demonstrations or protests, mass demonstrations, a life chain, which is a terminology that you may not know because it was very popular in the 80s and 90s, where it would be a group of people standing along the road, holding signs, talking about choosing life. All these things are First Amendment activities,
right?
But also counseling, such as sidewalk counseling or crisis center, which are CPCs, PRCs that we defend. We even have a case going to the Supreme Court. Hopefully, we filed a cert petition to protect these activities, and that's what's being labeled as terrorist activity.
Actually, protected activities by the First Amendment. And like you said, sidewalk counseling, we have cases, again, we have a case that we have requested the Supreme Court of the United States to take to protect sidewalk counselors and their First Amendment rights to be able to talk to these women as they go into abortion clinics. So it is very disconcerting that in Department of Defense at a military base at Fort Liberty, there would actually be an anti-terrorism training session where there is literally a whole slide devoted to the terrorists who are pro-life. And, you know, Congress has sent a letter which we supported, and they have asked for clarification on this. And they point out, look, you want to know who claims to be pro-life? It's half of Americans claim to be pro-life. So basically, the DOD, Department of Defense, is training their military personnel to identify half of Americans as terrorists if you hold a pro-life view.
That's right. And you referenced this letter from Congress. We can put it up on the screen, actually. This was drafted by Senator Ted Budd of North Carolina. So the base is in his home state. It's appropriate for him to take the lead on this. And we're very pleased that he did. And with 22 senators and 66 members of Congress also signed this letter with him. So a very strong showing from members of Congress, but also we over at ACLJ Action, our colleagues there signed on to the letter as well. So endorsing this, supporting the inquiry by Congress as well. We're going to do our own FOIA to try to get information that we can get public awareness about this. But it's also strong when you have members of Congress that are willing to take this step to push back when they see this. And I want to read a little bit from Senator Budd's letter because it reveals a little bit of interesting news here. And it says, the American public expects the Department of Defense and its personnel to defend the homeland from actual terrorists, not Americans who seek protections for children in the womb. Labeling pro-life organizations as threats challenges service members' moral obligation to defend and protect even the smallest among us. In fact, around half of all Americans, as you point out, identified as pro-life. It is no wonder that the Army is struggling to recruit young men and women to join its ranks when it appears their service attacks their values and promotes a woke agenda rather than improving readiness and lethality. We understand that the anti-terrorism slide was in fact briefed to a group of soldiers as recently as July 10th. What is unclear is how long these slides have been utilized at Fort Liberty and whether similar briefings have been used at other installations. We also understand from a statement released by Fort Liberty, these slides were not vetted by appropriate approval authorities. So we are going to get to the bottom of this, but it also, you can't let the current climate, the context in which this is happening, early July, as early as July 10th, or as recently as July 10th. So just 6 days ago, this was used to brief soldiers.
Right.
And you're talking about a time where we had a failed assassination attempt
with
on
a real terrorist.
With real terrorists on a conservative presidential candidate.
Right.
And when you think about this, that this is what the Army's doing.
Yeah.
And the left is saying to lower the temperature, but we know that the FBI has been going after pro-life advocates. We know that the IRS has gone after the Tea Party. We know that now the Army is briefing the soldiers on this being a terrorist group.
Right.
It's a very concerning state of affairs.
Yes, and we can't assume that this is a singular event either. So, you know, just because we now have knowledge that this is taking place on Fort Liberty, like you said, we don't know how long they've been using this training slide, how long pro-lifers have been, kind of targeted as terrorists. We don't know that Fort Liberty is the only military base that actually is purporting this craziness, that, you know, a pro-lifer is a terrorist. So those are all things that we need to get the bottom of. And it might not just be the Army. I mean, it's all the military, armed forces could be saying that pro-lifers are terrorists. So we need to get to the bottom of it. And when Congress asks, they can actually say, and they did, by July 29th, we want an answer to all of these questions. When we do a FOIA, as we consistently say, a lot of times they don't do a sufficient response, a timely response, and we end up in litigation trying to get the answers. But hopefully we'll get some answers on July 29th, and that might make us even have more questions to ask. And we will get to the bottom of this, because we cannot let our Department of Defense label pro-life Americans as terrorists.
That's right. And I'm thankful to Senator Budd and the 22 senators and 66 members of Congress that are also taking a stand on this as well. I'm thankful to our ACLJ action team that has these relationships and are able to meet and talk with these members of Congress to get action done. This isn't a story you're going to see on mainstream media. This isn't a story you're probably even going to see on cable news, because in the grand scope of things, this could seem like a little issue to most mainstream media watchers. But that's why you listen to this broadcast or watch this broadcast on YouTube and Rumble. That's why you support, during our Life and Liberty Drive, the ACLJ, because we see these and we immediately have meetings. I was talking with Cece immediately after I saw this photo circulating about, okay, is this something we can file a FOIA request on? Talk with the legal team, see what actions we can take. We have to talk about this. Right. We analyze it to make sure that we're comfortable going forward to talk about it, whether in an era with AI and all sorts of real deep fakes, not cheap fakes like the administration likes to talk about. We analyze, we use our expertise. We have sources that we talk to. Our government affairs team will talk to members of Congress. We immediately get to work. And we also come here daily, 5 days a week, to talk to you about it and inform you, because we know that these are issues you care about. We know that you're pro-life and you don't want to be labeled a terrorist by the Department of the Army, by the U.S. military, whether it be a garrison employee or the Secretary of Defense himself. You don't want that to be the America we live in, because we do cherish life. We do fight for life and liberty here at the ACLJ. And that's why during this Life and Liberty Drive, you are supporting these efforts. You are supporting this team that gets to work immediately when we see something like this. And this FOIA that we are sending is going out today or tomorrow, as early as today. And we have been in contact with members of Congress and potential clients as we look at the angles of how we can push back on this egregiousness that's coming out of the Department of the Army, out of a U.S. military base. Support the work that we are doing at aclj.org. Your donation will be doubled during this Life and Liberty Drive. Support us today, aclj.org.
Major decision out of Judge Cannon, the district court in Florida, Dad, both invalidating the appointment of special counsels for two reasons. One, that they don't go through a confirmation process, and that two, so they haven't been, they don't have a process to go through. And two, there is no fund appropriation that Congress sets aside for special counsel. So they can spend unlimitedly as long as the DOJ wants to keep them moving. And so it's like we're not going to have these unchecked prosecutors that are super U.S. attorneys not have to go through this process in the United States of America.
The important part of what Judge Cannon says here is that the special counsel's position effectively usurps the important legislative authority. But also, this is on page 67 of her opinion, she says the virtually unchecked powers given to the special counsel, to Special Counsel Smith under the special counsel regulations. And then she says, and this conclusion is great, since November of 2022, Special Counsel Smith has been exercising power that he did not lawfully possess. And then, of course, the case is dismissed. It goes to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. But let me also add that Justice Clarence Thomas, in the case involving the January 6th and the issue of presidential immunity, which was a big victory for President Trump, Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, said, hey, Jack Smith has no right to bring anything. He shouldn't be bringing any charges in violation of the appointment clause. So I think this is ultimately going to go to the Supreme Court if the president is not reelected. And I think the Supreme Court's going to say 6-3 or 5-4, no authority for Jack Smith. If Congress wants to fix it, go ahead and fix it, but not as it exists right now. So that I think Judge Cannon made the right decision, and this is obviously a significant victory for the former president.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Executive producer Will Haynes here, and I'm going to take your calls. As Logan likes to say, it's the most important voice on this broadcast. So we're going to go and start with line one. This is Tamara from Texas. She's an ACLJ champion, so she gets to jump in line, actually. Tamara, line one, you're on the air.
I appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you for all y'all do. I am a champion, and I'm fighting. So the reason I'm calling is that on JD Vance, I think it's okay, that, and I knew he was going to choose him. But my concern was in the beginning, he was like a absolute no Trump. He didn't want to have anything to do with them. So I just hope that JD Vance stands strong. He stands behind Trump. He has his back, and he's ready to fight because they're going to come at him with every arrow that's possibly out there. They're going to come at him bribery. They're going to come at him threatening his life. They're going to come at him. So I just hope that
Tamara, I think that the calculus actually may be a very wise one for President Trump. Instead of picking someone that's been alongside him the entire time, it is someone that now who can articulate why he is with President Trump now. And I think as you're seeing a lot of people that are turning their minds a little bit and seeing a different side of President Trump, especially after the failed assassination attempt. But there are many people that have shifted the way they think about the former president after these last 3 years. And I think that one of the most important things that could be offered by JD Vance is an articulation of how his mind changed. That's America. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to change your views on things. And I think that actually may be a strong suit for him and why he was picked. These candidates are heavily vetted. I think it's also important that while J.D. Vance said he was a never-Trumper early, he didn't run against President Trump where there was that direct dialogue in debates or in the media of why you shouldn't vote for this person. Someone like Nikki Haley, perhaps, that at the last minute was starting to get some rumblings. Maybe she could be in the mix. They had a very heated primary season. And so, therefore, I think someone like that wouldn't necessarily be the right pick. And that is kind of what Joe Biden did with Kamala Harris. And it ended up having to be a lot of awkward conversations about why they were fighting that you aren't fit to be president. And they come back later and say, OK, this is just a debate. So I think that there is some chess there, some strategy of picking someone who was not necessarily 100% on your team, but now is, but also didn't run against you in this primary. So thank you for calling, Tamara. I'm going to go to Sargon next from California on line 2. You're on the air.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Doing well.
You just said what I was about to say myself.
Sorry to steal your thunder there, Sargon.
What they do is slip you the note, and then you read it, and then I'm just saying, they picked him the exact reason you said, because he changed his mind. Amber Rose did the same thing last night at the convention. So they're pushing that agenda.
That's right. And you even saw the president of the Teamsters speak at the RNC. It was the first time ever, which for many people who have been in the Republican Party was something you maybe never thought would see, is that people are allowed to change their minds. They're allowed to look at the record of someone. You may not like the mean tweets, as the left likes to talk about, or the rhetoric that you think, or sometimes even lie about being given by the former president. But at the end of the day, you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to look at the record, and that's actually the beauty of this country. And that also shows you how the president isn't an authoritarian, is that he would bring someone on that was not in lockstep with him and be his running mate. Is that there are the beauty of this country is that we have freedom of thought and freedom of speech, and that's what we're seeing playing out here. Sorry to steal your thunder there, but I appreciate the call, and I think you're exactly right, so I'll give you that as well. Next, I'm going to go to Susan in Florida, calling on line 6. Susan, you're on Sekulow.
Hey, how you guys doing?
We're doing well.
Good. Listen, my only comment was prompted by the news outlet that made the disparaging, what I consider disparaging remark about J.D. Vance, that he was a naked authoritarian. What I want is for everybody to stop all of this foolishness. I wish there was some accountability for people who do this kind of thing, because to me it borders on slander.
Well,
and I just think it's wrong, and I wish there was something to be done.
I agree, Susan, and that's the problem, is that they'll continue to preach to conservatives that you have to tone down your rhetoric. But then you'll get Van Jones on CNN last night saying this. This is Bite 11.
This is a scary dude. Scary dude, because if you're hoping that after this near-death experience we're going to have a kumbaya convention, this is not a kumbaya pick. And so this would signal that Donald Trump is planning on doing a lot of hard governing. He's got somebody in there who's a pit bull. He's an attack dog. He went to law school. He's going to be in there making a whole bunch of stuff happen. So if you're worried about the Project 2025 and all type of stuff, this is a guy that's going to really keep you up at night.
This rhetoric is heightened rhetoric. This is what the president from the Oval Office said, tone down. Or was he not speaking to his own party? Because it seems like he wasn't. Because they aren't holding back. They are doubling down on how dangerous they think Donald Trump is, which is exactly the problem. That is the rhetoric that is the problem. Instead, they're actually trying to say, I saw Jen Psaki said she's really concerned. She's genuinely scared if the RNC doesn't change their programming. Why is she not looking at her own party and saying everyone needs to stop these things? If that's truly what they believe, then they need to be consistent, something they are not, ever. It's always the conservatives can't do this, but we can. And that's a big problem. And that needs to change. All right, we're going to go to Ann on line 3 from Pennsylvania. Ann, welcome to Sekulow.
Thank you so much for taking my phone call. Amen to the show. The show, great reporting today, obviously all the time. But, you know, you and Jordan and everybody, you're doing a service for this country. First, before I make my JD comment, I want to say this. There was absolutely a complete intelligence failure. There were way too many coincidences. And we need to have a complete, with no stone left unturned, investigation. And there are many, many reasons as to why I'm saying that. Law enforcement needs to come clean, and they need to admit they did a horrible job. There was no reason for them not taking the warning signs of this young assassin climbing up to the roof. Anyway, I digress. So as far as JD, the JD pick, I think it's really a good pick. And my little take on JD is, so Trump wanted somebody that's going to be loyal to the First America movement, the MAGA movement. The way that he has voted has shown that. And I feel like just because JD in the beginning didn't necessarily like Trump doesn't mean that he didn't agree with Trump's policies.
Right. And I'm only cutting you off because I have 30 seconds here, but I agree with you. Sometimes the dislike could have just been the persona and not necessarily the policies behind it. But thank you, everyone, for watching today and listening, and thank you for all your calls. We'll be back tomorrow with more updates with Jordan from the RNC. And again, we are in our Life and Liberty Drive. Support the ACLJ at aclj.org, and your donation will be doubled. We can't do this work without you. We'll talk to you tomorrow.